All right, students. Getting this lecture to you a little bit later in the week than I would like to, but I have had a rather insane schedule with my other job this week. I know most of you work and go to school, so I know you kind of understand that. I wanted to make sure that you did get a lecture based on 35 and 36. They're not going to be real long. A lot of the things that we talk about with 35 and 36 are covered to a certain extent with structure and different stuff with the when we talk about how a corporation is set up, when we talk about the financial part of it. 36 deals more with when we have to make changes in a corporation and what we're doing. 35 is on the structure and how it's managed. So these will not be real long. I'll do it in two different videos just so you have the separate videos to watch and not have to sit through a long one if you want to sit through the whole thing to take your notes. All right, we'll go ahead and get started. And this is chapter 35 in your book. It's the voting rights of shareholders and enforcement rights of shareholders with their roles. Then we'll talk about the role of directors and officers and how all that ties in. All right, the management structure for a corporation, especially when we get to the point where it's reached this level, is fairly similar across the board. It's normally required by statute and how it's set up. It is a pyramid that goes down with how it is arranged, smaller group, and so forth from the top down or the bottom up, depending on how you want to look at it. But it works in that pyramid setup. This is a way to look at it. Now you can also, when you start looking at how the power within these corporations go, you can invert on top of this to also have a segment of a pyramid going above it. But for the purpose of how they're managed, you have the officers that do the day-to-day operation. They're making decisions. They're running the company. They have subordinates that work under them, who normally will have subordinates who work under them, and so forth. The board of directors, if you remember from how a corporation is set up, that board, they're in charge of hiring and selecting those officers, and then they're elected by the shareholders. Right? The shareholders elect the board members. They can vote to have board members removed. They have to approve. There has to be shareholder approval for certain fundamental changes of a corporation. So we'll get into that a little bit more in 36, but it already talks about it when we think about what the shareholders and how the management of the corporation goes. Right. All right, so statutory model of corporate management is required by the state, but accurately describes the actual governance of only a few corporations, how they're set up. Most majorities are closely held. And remember that when we talked about how they're set up, we talked about financial structure. We have the closely held and publicly held. A closely held corporation may only have one or two people who are owners of that corporation, shareholders, and they may be the CEOs, everything within a closely held. So a closely held doesn't run the same. It runs in a little bit different style than how a corporation that is a publicly held corporation that you can buy stock in, you can buy bonds and whatever it may be within that one. There's a different setup for those that are closely held. They do not have market shares in a closely held. Most of the shareholders in closely held, they actively participate in the management of the business. To put that into a perspective, when Jeff Bezos began selling books and items out of his garage at the beginning of Amazon, he was CEO, he was the main shareholder. He was pretty much everything in the corporation. Then it became what we see as Amazon today. And at one point he was still CEO, but all that changed. And now you have a board of directors, you have a management group that runs it, you have all the managers, those executives that run it, plus all the millions of shareholders that own stock within Amazon. So the difference between the two, when it's closely held, it's a small group that makes decisions, has ownership, does everything to do with the company. Once they become public and they become publicly held, then they have to follow the statutory structure that's required by the state in which they were incorporated to have their management system set up. So shareholders, board, and executives. In a closely held, normally those shareholders will be directors and officers. Your board will consist of officers and vice versa. They'll all in most cases be shareholders within the corporation. With the large and you're publicly held, that we get that disbursement of duties. So in a publicly held, we get limited liability for those who have ownership. And what that does, it allows them to separate themselves from the day-to-days. All right. So in that day-to-day setup, they're not having to make daily decisions. They're not having to decide when this delivery is going to be made. Through different funds and stuff, when you own shares, depending on how you may own shares in a corporation, whether it's through retirement funds or whatever it may be, you don't make day-to-day decisions in that because there's people that have been hired to do that. And if you remember back to when I talked about that structure, that the shareholders give direction to the board members who then will make those hires. That's how it's all dispersed. All that is dispersed out among the groups, and how the statute says their responsibilities lie within their sections. All right, now the upside down part of that, you go from as far as how things are run and what they do. The shareholders can sign return proxies. They can sell their shares. The board of directors can delegate authority to officers. They ratify the actions of officers. The officers control selection of directors, run day-to-day business, and control the proxy votes that happen within there. And that's the structure of a typical publicly held corporation. When it comes to the role of the shareholders in what they do, their rights, shareholders normally have the ability to vote with common shares. They come in almost every case with voting ability. In other words, you get to vote on any changes or at least major changes that happen within a corporation. They do this through shareholders meetings. Shareholders meetings are also a statutory item. So by statute, by how it's set up, and depending on where it's set up, they're required to have so many board shareholders meetings. These can be annual, they can be semi-annual, but they're required so that any changes that need to be made, or if election of board members, whatever, they can do that. There can also be special elections that are held, special meetings to make decisions that need to be made that may be required by statute, once again, for a majority of the shareholders to vote on. The quorum and voting and how they set it up, there's going to be a minimum number set. Normally that's decided. There's going to be some type of directive as to the minimum number of shareholders that need to be present, or at least voting votes that need to be present. And you may not have physical shareholders there, but they could have their proxies there voting for them. That minimum number could be necessary in order for anything to carry. In most instances, a lot of places they want at least 60% there. Some want 3/4. Depends on how they were set up. A lot of that's done within the bylaws and different things inside the corporation that will set it up. But most statutes will have at least a minimum standard for them to follow when it comes to that. And so they can build at least to that minimum or go beyond it. When they do election of the directors, they're elected by a plurality of votes. So, that in a straight voting, how the votes come in. Cumulative voting entitles shareholders to multiply the number of votes they are entitled to cast by the number of directors for whom they are entitled to vote. All right, so a little bit of math there, and then to cast the product for a single candidate or to distribute the product among 2 or more candidates. So if they're allowed to vote for 10 shareholders and they get 1 vote per share or 1 vote each, and you base it off the number of shareholders or number of directors, they get 10 votes. And they can do that for 1, or they can say, I want 5 votes for this one, 3 votes for that one, and 2 more for the, can be split up, or however they do that. That's what how cumulative is set up. With straight voting, is each member or each shareholder gets a vote, and that vote will go toward the election of those officers. How we vote for our elected officials in our state and then within our government it's set up that way. The removal of directors by majority vote, then directors can be removed with or without cause, subject to cumulative voting rights, depending on how the cumulative voting rights work. Most time, if a director is being removed, it's because they have made decisions that were not good for the overall health of the company or the corporation or the overall health of the shareholders' holdings. They've made decisions that did not improve conditions. Any fundamental changes, and we'll get into fundamental changes in the next lecture, but any fundamental changes, they're required. Charter amendments, most acquisitions, and of course dissolution is a required vote from the shareholders. You can vote by proxy. You can use voting trust or shareholder voting agreements. Proxy is someone else voting. You give them the power to cast your vote. You're signing that power over to them. Proxy is basically someone standing in for you, doing what you're not available to do at the time, based upon your directive. Voting trust is when they get together. They transfer corporate shares, voting rights to a trustee when they get together and they put one person in charge of it. Then shareholder voting agreements, it provides that shareholders have greater control over the election, and it provides them a greater control over how things work. If a group of shareholders get together and pool their votes, they may only have 1 vote or 2 votes apiece, depending on how it's set up. They get together, they can wield more power if they're voting within a conglomerate of voters, a group that gets together. Restrictions on transfer of shares has to be reasonable and conspicuously noted when shares are transferred. All right, so I'm going to let you go back and look at this. It is in your book. You've probably seen it if you've read through the chapter. I'm 99.9% certain that if you do not see it on the quiz for these chapters, you will see it on the final. So you'll want to go back and look through some of this, especially how voting power can be revoked. The duration, there are several questions about duration of different groups and their voting power. So you'll want to go back and look at that. The enforcement rights of shareholders, right to inspect books and records, if they're done so in good faith. That's the big point here in how this works, is it has to be done in good faith. It cannot be done for a reason that does not benefit the rest of the shareholders. All right. So in good faith means they're doing it to benefit the corporation, benefit the shareholders. And a proper purpose. It cannot be for self-gain. It needs to be for, once again, a purpose that improves things for shareholders and how they work. Shareholders can have several suits, direct suits brought by the shareholder of a class of shareholders against corporation based upon ownership of shares, and derivative suits can be brought by the shareholder on behalf of the corporation to enforce a right belonging to the corporation. Notice the difference here. Direct suits are a group or shareholder or a group of shareholders that are suing the corporation based upon how something has happened with their ownership. Derivative suits are ones that are done on behalf of the corporation. So you have the board, you have the executives, whose job is and their mandate is from the shareholders to run the corporation by doing their due diligence, by doing everything they're supposed to make sure decisions are the proper decisions, by not making any just outright, callous decisions that do not or will not or adversely affect they do not affect the company or the shareholders in a good manner, and they purposely do stuff that adversely affects it, then they likely would bring a derivative suit. The difference in those and the difference in the two is in a direct suit, the shareholders could be looking for something for themselves for when they're suing the corporation. Could be money, could be how shares should be divvied up, several reasons. In a derivative suit, they do not get anything themselves. The corporation would be the one compensated for whatever wrong has been done against them. So the corporation as an entity would be compensated. The shareholder has the right to dissent, of course, from certain corporate actions that require their approval. I'll let you look over this once again. I'm not going to spend a lot of time going into it, but you'll want to look over it and kind of get an idea. You will see BUL3130 again, so keep that in mind. The derivative suit, some of the pieces that go into it, what can be done there. They recover damages from management for breach of duty, those type of things. You'll want to know how they're doing those. Then we get to the directors and officers and how their roles play out. The function of the board of directors is selection and removal of officers. They build and design the capital structure of the corporation. The expenditures, everything along those lines. Fundamental changes, the directors have the power to make, amend, or repeal the bylaws unless the power is exclusively reserved to shareholders. That would be dependent upon where they were incorporated at, what the statute says, and how the original bylaws were drawn up. The board of directors are the ones who would declare a dividend. So when we talked about disbursements in the last two chapters, disbursements are part of that. So they have the powers within their purview to declare that dividend and what type of dividend they're going to do. And then they set the pay for the management and how they're compensated. The election number and tenure of directors is set by incorporation statute and the articles of incorporation and the bylaws. States may have you have to have a certain number depending on shares. So many directors per share, or they could have a flat, this corporation has, because of how it's set up, it has to have this number at a minimum of directors. Some corporations they'll have a board that may consist of 5, 7, whatever. Others at one time, I remember when I was studying about Starbucks a lot for research for classes, I want to say that Starbucks had 12, 13 somewhere in there on their board. So the boards are not necessarily one set size, and they're definitely not a one size fits all. You may need several different board members. The more things your corporation is involved in, the more board members you're going to need, because you need to pull in expertise on certain subjects. And that's what the board fills in there. The vacancy and removal of directors, they may be filled by a vote of the majority of the remaining directors. And then their compensation is set by the board of directors. So they set their own compensation in how they're set up. See that as you see it. The directors have the power to bind a corporation only when acting as a board. Minimum number of the members of the board need to be present for a vote to work. And then if they take action without a meeting, it's permitted if a consent in writing is signed by all of the directors. Their delegation of powers, they can appoint committees to perform some but not all of their functions. The director's inspection rights, directors have the right to inspect corporate books and records. Remember, they have to, has to be for the right purpose, nothing malicious, and not for their own personal gain. The officers, and these are the ones that we hear about. Most people cannot name board members of a corporation they follow, but they can tell you who the CEO is. Most people don't know who, the board members of JP Morgan are, but they know who Jamie Dimon is, the CEO. Most people couldn't tell you the board on Amazon at one point, but they knew who ran it. The same way for Apple when Steve Jobs was still alive, the same way with Microsoft when Bill Gates was still running it. You knew who the CEOs were, but you didn't know who most of the board. All right, so the officers are the ones that they're the face of that corporation. So they have to be the right person, have to be selected the right way. Usually that selection is controlled by the board of directors. They may put together a committee that is a search committee, bringing in some outside help. They may bring in corporate headhunters to go looking for the right fit for their position that they're trying to fill. Their role of the officers is set by the bylaws. They serve as agents and fiduciaries of the corporation. So they carry that, duty as a fiduciary to do what is in the best interest of the corporation. Their authority is set in the bylaws, can bind a corporation. They can enter into a contract with it. When you see bind there, that means they can enter into a legally binding agreement, a contract of sorts with another company or whatever it needs, whatever the need may be, for them to make sure that the corporation is running in the way it should. They may actually express an actual implied or apparent with the binding. So remember, express and implied contracts and how they're set up. The duty of the directors and officers, that duty of obedience, diligence, and loyalty. They have to act within their respective authority that's given to them by the next level up above them. Exercise ordinary care and prudence and undeviating loyalty to the corporation. They do not go after their own self-interest. They do not do anything that would compete against the corporation while they hold office or while they sit on the board. They do not do anything that would cause harm to it, or their actions should not be anything that would cause harm to the reputation or the running of the corporation, or in any way cause harm to the shareholders and the value of their ownership. The business judgment rule it precludes imposing liability on directors and officers for honest mistakes in judgment if they act with due care, in good faith, and in a manner reasonably believed to be in the best interest of the corporation. In most cases, if they're acting with due care, they're doing their due diligence, they act in good faith and a manner reasonably believed to be in the best interest of the corporation, the shareholders are not going to have a lot of issue with that. So it's not something that would normally run into a liability issue that way. Corporation may indemnify a director or officer for liability incurred if he acted in good faith. In other words, protect them from it. The limited liability that goes with it, many states will authorize corporations with its shareholder approval to limit or eliminate liability of directors for some breaches of duty. All right. So that's a basic management structure review. A lot of that's similar stuff that where we got away from what we had talked about prior was when we started talking about their individual responsibilities, those type of things. We do have another PowerPoint that is 36. And I do not want to hold you too long on this one. So I'm going to end this one and I'll come back for another video here in the next little bit. You'll see another one and it'll cover chapter 36. All right. So any questions, any concerns, if you watch, let me know.